I can assure you that if young people's perspectives are included, this would be very different. I also went on to share an example of how, when one of those particularly bad weather events hit here, the impact it had on young people through public transport systems that weren't considered by others. It was 2016. Many of the roads around Koirua were closed due to landslips. Train stations weren't operating as they were completely flooded, and there was only really one road in and out of where I live. Most parents and young children just chose to stay home from work or school. But I, like many others, needed to get to school to sit a final exam to ensure I could go to university. Yes, adults may have had to miss a day of work. Yes, there are also adults who study. But for young people from the years 11 to 13, and potentially the following 3 to 5 years through university, we regularly have exams that can affect our whole future. The traffic was so bad that my father, who was driving me, couldn't even get the car off the street. And after spending an hour to move about a few hundred metres, we decided the only way I was going to get there on time was to park up and walk. About 3/4 of the way through this probably an hour and a half long walk, we realised we weren't going to make it on time. We noticed that the traffic was flowing a bit more freely now it's through the bottleneck. So we decided the best option was to hitchhike a ride. Thankfully, I got there on time. But I don't know any city in the world where a 16-year-old girl would have been safe to do that by herself. We need to ensure these situations don't become more and more common with climate change. As a young person, if I didn't have my father with me, I would have been on a school bus with even less flexibility and hope. There are few transport infrastructures that suit the unique needs of young people. School buses and routes are often at the bottom of a to-do list and tend to fit around the needs of the workforce. An additional issue which we also saw, apparently, I'm not 100% sure, during the Christchurch earthquake, is that for young people when sitting exams, special processes need to be triggered within local government for them to then get special allowances from MCA for not sitting an exam if it was due to circumstances outside of their control. Because young people aren't represented in government, often the people deciding whether to trigger those processes don't consider our needs. So, additionally to the official program, there was also a series of special youth events, such as the pre-consultation, which I explained about, but there were also events during this where we got to sit down with the Irish ambassador, the chair of the commission, as well as the youth envoy and the executive director of UN Women, and explicitly asked them not only if they had read our agreed minimum standards, not only if they were listening to our perspectives, not only how they were going to make sure they were included in the final outcomes, but yet individual commitments from every single one of them of how they were going to make sure other countries also support our perspectives. But why? Why do we need to get young women's voices in decision making? Firstly, as you would have hopefully learned from my little anecdote there, we have a lived experience like no one else's. We are often at the intersections of many vulnerabilities. We are also some of the most common to be left out of decision making. We know that at high levels of decision making, both in business, community and government, women are excluded. And we know that even more so, young people are excluded. And it's often because the people who created the processes didn't have the voices of young women. And then we can't get into the high levels of decision making because the processes don't work for us. So we continue to get left behind and behind. Another example of public transport is that young women often can't drive. You have to be 16 to get your learner license, and then I think it's 6 months to get your restricted license. And even then you can't drive after certain hours. So if we are catching public transport, it's not just a train to a stop, we then also need other routes to get home. During certain times, this also creates safety concerns. There are additional elements for young women such as snap maps, which is an element of Snapchat where if you are connected to Wi-Fi, all of your friends can see your location. there are many safety concerns this creates, which probably weren't even considered when designing these areas and the bus routes and train timetables. Probably things that decision makers weren't even aware of. And I'm sure there's probably already new apps and things that people younger than me are using that I'm not aware of. And for more dramatic examples, I also learned obviously a lot at the Commission about women's rights in other countries, and quite a common one coming out of Africa was the design of schools without secure toilets. The toilets were often out the back, kind of sheltered by a bit of a forest to give a bit of privacy, and they just weren't very secure, and most people wouldn't really use them during the day. But for young women, especially those who were menstruating, they had no choice. And it often meant walking out into these vulnerable and isolated environments where they were caused harm. And here is another really great example of why. So this was from a cool little quiz I did online by an NGO that helps people demonstrate the impact different actions they have can have on climate change. And I was really pleased when I got about halfway down and saw empowering women. And if we look at increasing access to family planning, educating girls, and closing the gender gap in small-scale farming, we see that it's equivalent to taking millions and millions of cars off the road. So that's another great reason. But if we know why, how? So this is an example of some more Instagram stories I did, and these are for the City Council to figure out how young people would best engage in the next election. So the City Council decided that they wanted to run focus groups with young people to then create a strategy. So I asked young people, do you feel that you're engaged or disengaged? And if not, why? And the most common response was definitely that they weren't educated enough, they just didn't know enough of even where to start. So these few stories ended up having over 700 views and nearly 300 responses within the space of a day. I was able to create a 3-page report about what young people did and didn't want and why they weren't engaged. And that was with a budget of $0 in about 3 hours. Education. As I mentioned, most people say they just don't understand. We don't have any really civics education in our school anymore. So many young people have to seek this elsewhere. I know I do some work with youth, and that's one of the biggest things we do because it's not there. Young people leave school, they don't understand what the government does, they don't understand what local council does, they don't understand why they should vote, or any of that stuff. The other thing that I often hear is that young people are apathetic. We're complacent, we don't care. But as a young person who in 3 hours can get 1,000 young people to engage with politics, which is apparently really hard, I constantly see a system that's apathetic, complacent, and doesn't care to change to keep up with the needs of young people. I have no doubt that the life I live, the way I consume information, the way I learn about things, my decision making and my work in the future will be very different to yours. And I have no doubt that even my siblings who are only a few years younger than me will also have very different responses to those. But I see a world where young people need to work, do extracurriculars, volunteer work, and get at least 2 degrees and still not be able to pay their rent and only maybe get a job. I see a world where most young people often work in vicarious contracts with multiple jobs or work online in international spaces, so don't get the same protections and securities as traditional workforces, as our local companies and legislations fail to keep up. I see young people who care more than ever about issues that political systems deal with, but these same young people are burnt out. They've been raised in an economy where your worth is based on how productive you are, or how productive you show yourself to be on social media. Young people don't have time, energy, or confidence or the education to go to public consultations, take hours out of their life to seek a civic education that the school system failed to give them. I to see a council that's finally got on social media, but rather than working with young people who are actually leaders in their community, who have a genuine social media following, who can connect with and invite their friends to events, they pay a robot to pop up an ad in an algorithm. Do you think that if you didn't understand an institution, what it does for you or the systems, paid for a robot to pop up in your face among 100 other things, you're really going to click on that event and attend it, give your time and emotional energy to go and understand? The other really good way to get young people to engage is to articulate how what you're saying or what you're doing matters to them. There are so many things that are grabbing young people's attention. They have to worry about work, school, they have lots of different social media apps and things that are trying to draw them in. But we are also seeing more and more that young people care about things that positively affect their lives or communities and address challenges. I know this is something that Alexia actually articulated well through research, that to get women into STEM careers, a really good way is to articulate how they can create safer cities and public transport to help women and families, and that's way more enticing to them than you're good at maths and you can make lots of money, which has been the traditional approach and draw more men to these fields. You need to cut through the noise to get through to these young people.